Well, hey everyone, this is Ron, KC0QVT. I am your host of Ham Radio Heavyweights. This is a new show that's sponsored by BridgeCom Systems, and its aim is to bring to you guys influential people in ham radio, or people that have used ham radio to positively impact their lives. And with that said, I have an awesome guest here for me today. I'm with Gil Weiss, K3GIL. And I met Gil about a year and a half ago. Gil bought a plug-and-play bundle from us. He wanted to get into DMR. And anyway, we got it all done for him, got everything set up, and we shipped it to him, and he never got it. And that began our journey of learning how to find stuff that gets lost in the mail. So anyway, this took a long time to do, and we finally got it. We finally got the package found. Turns out that it was delivered to the neighbor. But all that while, Gil was just such an awesome person to deal with. I mean, he was so accommodating. He understood that, problems happen, and we worked with him through it. And he worked with my entire team here at BridgeCom. And we got to know him a lot better. And then after he got into DMR, what was even more interesting was how he started learning the technology. He got on our Facebook group page. He started helping people. And he just became a big contributor to the DMR landscape that's happening in amateur radio. And as I got to know him more and more and all of his contributions, I said, I got to know this guy. And he really intrigued me by the way he helped people. So anyway, I got to know Gil through all that. And let me share with you some details. Gil has worked as a professional photographer, educator, and a school director. He spent most of his 57 years as a professional in project management and customer relations. He's been married for 52 years. He's got 2 children. He's been a licensed ham for going on 44 years. And I'm very pleased to be able to have Gil Weiss, K3GIL, on the show today. Gil, welcome to Ham Radio Heavyweights.
Thank you, Ron. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here with you, especially as the first guest on your new show. And I wish you best of luck with your endeavor here. And it's exciting. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Definitely. It was really cool to meet you over the last good while. I mean, you've posted a lot of neat things in the group page. You're a very helpful individual. I mean, you've been very patient with a lot of guys, and it's really cool to see what you're doing because you just got this new technology in your mind and you just ran with it, and it's been really cool to see that. And that's what intrigued me about wanting to talk to you.
Okay, well, I'm. What should I say? I'm sort of a go-getter, and I love technology. I've been involved with technology since I was a kid. When I first started building crystal radios and eventually tube sets and playing with walkie-talkies, I'm talking like 5, 6, 7 years old. And I always had this great interest in two-way radio and in electronics from when I was a kid. And I guess I ought to also mention here, by way of history, my other 2 interests that go back that far, I always liked airplanes and I always liked boats. And to this day, I have those same 3 interests all these years, and I'm now 76 years old. So not a whole lot's changed when it's come to what I like to mess around with.
Well, let's talk about your upbringing. In some of the questions I asked you, you cite your parents as being your best mentors. Tell me about your mom and dad. I mean, how big of an influence were they in your life?
I was thinking about where did I learn the basic life skills, basic philosophies, and so forth that have guided me to this point. And sure, I've met a lot of influential people along the way. I've gone to a lot of seminars and meetings and all that kind of stuff. But it really goes back to my parents. My mom was a school teacher and a very, very hardworking individual. She brought up 2 kids, worked full-time, and did a lot of actual overtime work, too, in her school job. And she basically taught me a lot about social responsibility, work ethic, that sort of thing. And my dad, he was an oral surgeon, and he had a great set of hands. And back from when I was a kid, he wasn't working with people. He was working in our shop in the basement, and he used to build a lot of furniture. And my greatest thing on a Sunday, he worked Saturday actually, it was mostly Sunday, was go down in the shop with him and help him build stuff. And basically, he taught me how to use all types of hand tools, power tools, how to design, approach, build a project from concept through completion, the processes involved, and the way you have to approach things. So I learned a great deal from him too. And I'm proud to say, between my mom and my dad, I think overall I came out pretty good.
Indeed, yeah. That's I had a dad like that too that was big into woodworking, so I can appreciate that. He had all the various things. So yeah, that's cool that you had a dad like that. Now, did your dad get you into? You mentioned earlier planes. Did your dad get you into model planes?
I I guess I got him into model plane.
Oh, okay.
He was a model builder too. He liked models, and maybe I got some of my early model building skills from him. I think he used to build ship models, and he eventually built some model airplanes, which really spiked the interest in me. And I'm talking back when I was like 7, 8 years old and older. And we spent 2 years basically living in Europe when he served in the armed forces during the Korean War. This was in the like 1952 to 1954. And we lived in Germany. And of course, Germany is like living in a toy factory. The trains, the model planes, all the stuff they made and sold over there were really amazing. And we brought actually a lot of trains back with us. We actually built a few airplanes over there, along with some friends of his that worked with him in the dental clinic. And I think we brought a few gasoline engines back from there. So I was, pretty well hooked at that point. Then when I got here back home, the model building continued. My brother also was interested. He was 3 years younger than me. And way back, we both started, my father, I, and my brother started flying control line. This was way before radio control. We flew in the wires in a circle, and also flew free flight, where you built the plane and set it up and trimmed it and just let it go. And hopefully it flew, and hopefully you got it back. There was timers on the tail. There was a way of actually getting it back. And the three of us went to contests all around the Philadelphia area and even some farther distances away. I flew in the 1957 National Model Airplane Championships.
Oh, wow.
And we also flew in a couple of other big meets at a big air station near here, Johnsville Naval Air Station. So we were, as a family, very, very heavily involved in this. But then, like, what happens is girls come along. And this, of course, is during high school. And when the girls come along, you kind of lose interest in the model airplanes and stuff. And I found, talking to a lot of my fellow aero modelers and flyers, it's a very typical thing. I got out of the airplanes for like 25 years. And then one day when my older son was in 8th grade, he came home and he says, "Dad," he says, "you used to build model airplanes, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, we have a school project. How'd you like to build a radio control airplane?" Well, I was already a licensed amateur radio operator. So, I'm very familiar with radio and transmitters, receivers, and all that stuff. And of course, I was very familiar with model airplanes. So I said, of course. And I went, and the first one we built was a sailplane with a 6-foot wingspan. And actually, I don't know if I can move the camera or not. Okay, there it is. That's it. That goes back to 1982. And we learned to fly on it, and then we got tired of it because, it's kind of slow and sedate, and we wanted to go fast and do aerobatics and stuff. And I sold it, and the guy that bought it from me sold it, and it wound up back. Third owner or fourth owner was a friend of mine that I flew with in my model airplane club, and one day he gave it back to me. So this plane is, God knows how many hundreds, thousands of flights it's had on it, and it's still in one piece. And here it is over my head. So that's kind of amazing,
Now, is that after it's been sold and sold and sold, and then eventually back to you, or did you own it the whole time?
It was owned by 3 or 4 other people.
Oh, wow.
And then it was eventually given back to me by the last owner, because he knew I built it, because he flew in the club when I first flew it. So, like I say, my kids both learned to fly on it. But then, especially the kids, they, like I say, everybody wanted to go faster and do aerobatics, and that wasn't the kind of plane to do it with. So we moved into bigger, higher power, totally aerobatic stuff, which my two kids and I, well, we still enjoy doing it today when we can get together and do it. It's kind of a skill like riding a bike. You never forget it. Takes you a while to learn, but you never forget how to do it. And model building taught me a great deal, which goes back and forth with all my amateur radio experience in approaching highly complex technical projects and how to be successful and how to deal with them. And a lot of the skills I learned from model building carried right over into electronics and amateur radio, and some of it vice versa went back the other way. So, I kind of been bouncing back between the two of them, and it's worked out great. A lot of fun.
Now you'd mentioned earlier that you went to Europe with your parents, and when we before the show here, you told me about this ocean trip that you took, and I'm sure the viewers would love to hear about this trip. And you said that it was this pilot of this ship, or this captain of this ship. Well, I'll let you tell the story because I think it's fascinating because you're still in boating to this day.
Probably most of the people that took that ride never went near a boat or a ship again. But being a kid, my brother and I, we traveled with two other kids our same age, and we were all around 8 years old. And the whole trip, most of the passengers and over half the crew, they were all seasick. So we literally had the run of the ship. We actually got into the engine rooms where you weren't supposed to go. There was nobody there to stop us. So we thought, this trip was like great. But the third night, it's a 4-day trip. Oh, the ship, it was the SS United States, which was the world's fastest ocean liner. That ship was designed by a guy, can't think of his name. It was designed for the military with also the idea of using it as a civilian ship, which it was, to be fast and transport troops from like the United States to Europe in a matter of 4.5 days. This was, of course, before transoceanic airliners were a routine thing. So the ships were the fastest way of moving people across bodies of water. Well, anyway, that was the heritage of the ship, but it never really, I don't know if it ever really hauled troops. The SS United States Lines bought it, and it had a sister ship, the America, which was a little smaller, and I don't know if it was quite as fast. But this boat we went from Le Havre, France. Well, actually, we went from New York City to Le Havre, France in less than 4.5 days. And that's a little over 3,000 miles on a boat.
Wow.
So you got to figure for a big ship, I don't know how they did it. I know it had huge engines and huge propellers. But again, the third, I guess it was the third night, was the captain's gala dinner. And this was November of 1952, which is the worst month from the North Atlantic. And the ship ran into a full gale. And I know the captain was given the opportunity of going around the gale. But the guy, based on what I know about boats and weather and everything else, my opinion, made a very almost horrible decision. It could have killed everybody on that ship. He wanted to keep the speed record up and go through the gale to stay on schedule. And this was one of the maiden voyages of this ship, so they didn't want to let the public think, if the weather's bad, we can't deal with it. And this guy said, we'll go through it. Well, that night of the captain's gala dinner, which literally nobody attended, the ship passed its critical list angle 3 times of 45 degrees. And theoretically, it should not have come back up right side, but it did, thank goodness. Everybody survived, but it's like something, you'll just never forget. And what can I say? It was a heck of an experience, and we sure were glad when we landed in Le Havre, France. I think everybody got off the boat, got down on their knees, and kissed the dirt or something. We were happy to be there. So that's my first major. Well, it's not my first major boating experience. I have to say, my father got me interested in boats even before I was 8 years old. He taught us how to fish and do all that kind of stuff and go on boats down the Jersey coast. So I had a very early introduction into boats. And that ship ride never dissuaded me or anything. And I've always been into boats. And years ago, we used to do a lot of fishing. My wife used to fish. My kids used to fish. And to this day, I own a boat.
Mm. Well, I've never been on any kind of seas that were like that. I mean, you obviously were you in your cabin just trying to hang on? I mean, what's it like when the boat is listing beyond the 45? I mean, how do you? It's like on a roller coaster that never stops.
It's worse. You're going in 3 or 4 different directions. You're rocking side to side, and you're pitching forward and backward, and you're also rolling at an angle between side by side and forward and backward. It's like, and when you first get on these boats, the hallways are carpeted about 3 feet up the walls. And that like strikes you odd. Why would they carpet the floor and, part way up the wall? Well, when that boat goes over 20, 30, 35, 40 degrees, you're walking with 1 foot on the wall and 1 foot on,
Oh, wow.
on the floor. And that's something people don't think about, So you're going back and forth from one side of the hallway with your foot on the right side wall. You go back across the floor to the left side of the hallway, and your left foot is then on the left side of the wall. And that's, it sounds crazy, but, and you're also pitching backward and forward. And another thing I got to mention, when the boat goes backward and forward, the nautical term is cavitation. The propellers come out of the water. Well, these propellers on this ship are huge, and the vibration just totally shakes the whole ship. It rattles your teeth. It's that bad. And like the night of the storm, we were laying in bed. Oh, and the beds all have seat belts, which, when you first got on the boat and checked your cabin out, you kind of wondered about that. Why do I have and this was before seat belts were in cars. Why do I have straps on the bed? Well, you would have strapped yourself in at night, or else you'd be, rolling out on the floor. So you're laying there strapped in bed, and that boat's rocking and rolling, and those props would come out of the water, and everything would shake and moan and groan and all kinds of noises. And all I can say is it wasn't fun.
Wow.
Something I'll never forget.
That's a really cool story. Yeah, I've never been on a vessel like that, so definitely I can see it in my mind's eye. Well, anyway, let's shift to your you're out of high school now. You're off to university now. Where'd you go to school, and what'd you do after school, or what'd you major in? What prompted you to go to school?
Well, my parents always pushed college. They were big believers in having kids, with a college education as far as the careers and everything. So actually not going to school was not an option for me. And of course, one of the hardest decisions you make as a kid is, what am I going to do the rest of my life?
No doubt.
For me, the natural thing, become an aeronautical engineer. I love airplanes. Now, did I know anything about aeronautical engineering? Well, I knew they designed planes, and I actually at that point had designed models that worked and everything. So I had some understanding. But anyway, I went to Penn State University for actually 2.5 years in aerospace engineering. But I was having a lot of trouble with the math. And a combination of circumstances made me decide this, just as much as I love airplanes, this just isn't for me. And the other thing that came up, the more I talked about people that were aeronautical engineers, the more I realized that what they do is sit at a desk doing all kinds of design and, design work and hypothetical, theoretical work. And I wanted to build stuff. And what I actually should have done was become an aeronautical technology guy that actually built stuff. But back in those days, like I say, you had to get a college degree, and I didn't really know about that option. So I eventually transferred to Temple University here in the city and wound up graduating from there with a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Management. And then I went on to graduate school there, pursuing an MBA in Information Science. I also have to admit the other reason I made the change was because that was when I had fallen in love, and my love was going to Temple University, and going to Penn State, living up at State College, Pennsylvania, 200 miles away was not conducive to seeing her very often. So that also influenced my decision. But it worked out great. We got married. Everybody's happy, and that's the story.
So you, while you're at Temple, you were in the military, or was that before Temple?
Actually, the whole 2 years I was at Penn State, I was in ROTC,
Okay.
Reserve Officer Training Program. And then when I transferred to Temple, I was going to continue in the advanced program. And make a long story short, they never pursued it with me. And I come to find out that when you switch universities, it breaks your contract. You have no more legal responsibility to go along with it. And my plans had kind of changed at that point, and I decided, well, if I don't really have to go in, I won't. But that didn't last too long because things changed. Back then, it was under President Johnson. And all of a sudden, right when I was graduating, I became draft eligible. And I knew enough about the service and everything. I didn't want to be drafted. That's another kind of life rule for me. I try to be proactive and control my situation. So when that came about, rather than just take a chance of getting drafted and, not knowing what's going to happen, it could have been a very dangerous situation. I did some research, and I actually enlisted in a U.S. Army Reserve unit here in Philadelphia. And I spent about a year on active duty in the training program, and then I came back here, and I spent another, about 7.5 years in the reserves. And I actually always enjoyed the military. And I should say my father also served in the military, which is why he was in Europe. And he actually always had a positive military experience too, which is one of the reasons I, always kind of thought about continuing on with it. So that's the story of my military experience.
So was this about what, late 60s, mid 1960s? Where?
I went to basic training not far from where you live. I spent 8 wonderful weeks in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Know of it. It's not far from Rolla, Missouri, where I went to university. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
As I recall,
I was going to say my dad was there as well, so I heard all about that place.
Okay, well, we were there over the summer, and there were days it was so hot and humid, they actually suspended training, which for the Army or the military, that's pretty substantial,
Oh, yeah.
So I will say, though, other than those 8 weeks, I've been to St. Louis on business trips and stuff, and Missouri's a great state. But that period, that was not a vacation.
What year was that?
It was in 1967.
Yeah, that's right, when the Vietnam War was just getting going.
Yeah, it was going real strong. And
yeah,
as I said, I enlisted. I was in a hospital unit, General Hospital, 348th General Hospital. And when I came back on my monthly weekends where I, served, did my reserve training or reserve service, I should say, I was the hospital. I was trained as an optician, but my unit didn't really have a spot for an optician, so they made a medic out of me. So I wound up at the Naval Hospital here in Philadelphia, and also spent a lot of time at Walston General Hospital, which is at Fort Dix in New Jersey. And I had a lot of involvement for several years with all of the really badly wounded soldiers coming out of Vietnam. And that was kind of an eye-opening, gut-wrenching experience, I have to say. Yeah,
my father served in the Army as well, but he was before the Vietnam War. So okay. All right. Let's shift into your. You're now graduated. You graduated from Temple, or when?
Temple. I initially graduated Temple 67 or 68.
And you immediately got a master's degree? You stayed in?
No, I did the master's work actually after I got out of the Army and went to work.
Okay.
The company I worked for actually paid the freight on the master's degree studies. So I graduated, and I immediately, I graduated like in, I guess, end of May, early June. And within weeks, I went off to Fort Leonard Wood. So when I got back from there, Oh, then for Fort Leonard Wood, my advanced training was in Denver, Colorado, at Fitzsimmons General Hospital. And I was married at that point, and Carol joined me in Colorado. We were there for, I don't know, 6 months at least, 7 months. And that was a wonderful place, and that was actually a great assignment. Very totally different than basic training. It was actually like going to college out there. And we really, we lived off base, and we actually lived near Lowry Air Force Base, which was a few miles from Fitzsimmons. So we used to spend a lot of time on the Air Force Base, going to the movies, the shopping in the PX, the food places, and that sort of thing. And when I came back from there, I looked around for a job, and my first professional job was with Boeing Aircraft. At that point, and it was back at that point, Boeing had bought a company called Vertol Helicopters, which was located right near Philadelphia International Airport. And I worked there for several years and really, really enjoyed it. But then things started getting a little shaky looking as the war wound down, because they were basically selling the big Chinook helicopters and the smaller CH-46s to the Army. And incidentally, the Chinooks are still going strong. It's one of the longest run, what should I say, aircraft ever. So I had a lot of experience with them. Anyway, so I eventually left there and went to work for a computer company in marketing and customer service and so forth, Control Data Corporation. From there, I went into professional photography for 4 years. That led to the educational position, which ultimately led me to become the director of the Antonelli Institute of Art and Photography, which is now part of Harcum College. So I did that for like 15, 16 years. And the people that owned the college also owned the biggest and oldest commercial photo lab here in Philadelphia. And at the end of my educational work, I sort of got tired of it. And I went to work at the photo lab as director of sales and marketing, directly for the guy that owned the school. And I enjoyed that for several years. But then I met somebody through a girl I worked with, actually her husband. She worked at the same place, that owned a professional model shop. And she wanted me to go see this guy, Mike. And I wound up going to work for a company, Universal Services Associates. They're still in business. As a matter of fact, I just talked to Mike last week, and we're going to be getting together for lunch soon. I was like a kid in a toy store down there. They made all kinds of professional models for aerospace and defense, nuclear power plants, electric generation plants, all highly technical stuff. This was before CAD. And before CAD, if you were building highly complex factories, you used models to prove the design. That's how it worked. And they also were a prototyping company. They made a lot of like custom first run parts. And their biggest customer was Boeing helicopters. So right away, I was back at Boeing. I actually, for years, had a badge to the plant as a vendor. And they used to call me the old Boeing guy because, I used to work there. Matter of fact, in their main lobby was a giant mural. And one day I'm sitting there waiting for somebody to meet me. And I'm looking at this mural. My picture was in it from like 68 or 69. So most of my career, I was very happily involved with Boeing. And
pretty impressive that, you worked for Boeing or through the first job, then you left there, went off and did a whole bunch of other stuff, and then eventually found yourself in another job that got you right back where you were and your picture's still on the wall.
Right. Exactly.
That's cool. Well, one thing that I want the viewers to see that through all this is that you, at some point in time, you got your ham radio license during this time, and I want you to, when did you first get licensed?
I got my license while I was a professional photographer. I think in 73, 74.
Okay.
Matter of fact, then I got involved with the school, which at that time was located in Center City, because I remember when I went for my general ticket, I was working in Center City. And this was back when you went to the FCC office to take the test. There was no volunteer examiners. You had to go deal with the feds. And I remember going there and passing the test. And I literally floated the 5 or 6 blocks going back to work, how happy I was. I was like, elevated off the sidewalk in joy, having that general ticket in my pocket. So that was like in 77, I think. And a year or
Okay.
so after that, I got the advanced ticket, which is no longer in existence. That was between general and extra. And I've stayed there ever since.
So you don't have an extra. Advanced is and you don't need an extra. You're at the top of the mountain as an advanced, right?
The advanced, the big thing, I honestly was never a great CW
Okay.
operator. I got up to 13 words a minute to get to general. And I just had trouble with CW. So in those days, to get the extra ticket, you had to do 20 words a minute. Well, I tried, and I got as high as like 17, 18, but it was painful. So I said, "To heck with this." I got the advanced, and that gave me just about all the frequencies the extras had. There was a few little, like on 20 meters, on the HF bands, there was a few little areas where only the extras could go, but it didn't really mean very much as far as working the bands or working with DX or anything. So I just never bothered. That said, about a year ago when the pandemic hit, I thought, it would just be like nice to have the extra. So I signed up for one of these online schools, but at that point, it was a problem taking the test because of the quarantine situation. And I started studying and everything. And then eventually, then I got into DMR and got so involved with the hotspots and the code plugs and all that stuff. I just, I figured I really don't, need the extra. I have my short call sign, and I'm totally happy where I am. And I never finished the course. So I'm advanced, and that's where it's at.
Well, you shared with me something that I found actually very intriguing was some of the QSOs that you've had with what would be, these are some pretty famous hams. You mentioned two here, and I want to touch on it just to see what that experience was like. Well, let's start with Barry Goldwater. And I did some research after this. I was like, wow, he was the 1964 Republican candidate for presidency. And he was a big ham, a big-time ham back in the day. And you actually had conversation with him.
Yes, quite a few. He had a huge, I was going to say ranch. It was out in Arizona, maybe? Somewhere out west there. I think it was Arizona. And he had a big ham radio station, huge beam out behind the house. And most weekends, whenever he was home, not, traveling for the Senate. He was a senator for many, many years. He'd get on the radio, and I used to talk to him quite frequently. And that's the great thing with ham radio. I don't care, you're a brain surgeon, a doctor, a ditch digger. Everybody's equal on the radio, and you get to meet some great people from all walks of life, which to me is it's a lot of fun and part of the enjoyment of ham radio, of amateur radio. And he'd get on. He wouldn't tell people who he was. He would just give his call sign. It was N6 something or other. This is Barry, and my QTH is wherever it was in Arizona. But I mean, I knew because it was publicized.
So, do you remember anything you talked to Barry Goldwater about, or is that just I talked to Barry Goldwater?
Obviously, it wasn't politics, but no, just casual conversation, chit chat. I mean, it was a regular QSO. It wasn't just a signal report and you moved on. And I talked to him a few times, but the other one I think I mentioned to you, as far as DX, I have my worked all states. I have my worked all continents. I've got about 88 or 89 confirmed countries. I never got to 100. But anyway, I was on HF, probably 20 meters. And I hear a call, JA1. JA1 was King Hussein of Jordan. He was an avid amateur radio operator. And of course, he never said, well, this is the King of Jordan. He would get on. I talked to him. And, this is JA1, name Hussein, QTH Jordan. That's all he would say, But that was kind of neat, actually talking to him.
What year was this, would you estimate? Do you remember?
I would, yeah, that would have to be somewhere 77, 79, maybe
Oh, wow.
80. So maybe even the early 80s. That's when I was real active in HF chasing the awards. I used to do a
And
lot
it,
of contest work back then too.
okay, cool. And this is all the while you've got kids now. You're in your career. You're doing your ham radio, and you're growing in your your professional life. You're working as a marketer or as a oh no, you're a photographer at this point.
Well, no,
And
actually, well, yeah, in the late, well, actually, in 1975 is where I was a professional photographer for around 71 to 75. 75 is when I was asked about the school position and I took it.
okay,
And I worked there 75 till about 90, actually. So like 15 years. And then from 90 to 94, I worked for the parent company at the photo lab. And then I went on into the model specialty fabrication field where I spent the rest of my career.
yeah, you've got an interesting story about working in the model company where somebody didn't the company pay you to do a model and it saved them a lot of money. I can't remember the exact story, but I'd love to hear that.
I won't go into details, but again, back in those days, actually, when we did that model,
And what is it? What is modeling? I mean, what are you modeling? I mean, because what comes to mind, I think, model trains, model cars you buy on you buy the thing, glue it all together.
you know what a refinery looks like inside? All the pipes and wiring and complexity. It's mind boggling.
Oh, I bet.
Again, when the engineers and the nuclear power plants the same way, um, anything to do with pipes. And when they design these things, they're always worried about what they call conflicts, where they don't realize that when they start to build it, one big pipe is going to run into another big pipe, and now they got a big problem. So I think the model I was talking about was actually for a company in Switzerland. And this was right when CAD was around, but this company hadn't really switched over to it. They were still using models. So we built, and I think it was electrical generation. Wasn't oil refineries, that kind of stuff, or nuclear. It was an electrical plant. We built this large, totally accurate model of what they were going to build. And the model was around $70,000. And when I actually sold the project, they were balking at the price. A little expensive. And finally, they decided to go with it. And we built the model and we shipped it over. And they come to find out that there was a couple of major conflicts that were shown on the model that they had no idea. And I project managed the job on my end. And the guy I was dealing with in Switzerland, he calls me one day and he says, remember the day I complained about the price of the model? I said, yeah. He said, well, that model saved us hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, plus a lot of lost time, because it identified the conflict before it got in the way of the project. So, and I had that from other customers too. So that's the benefit of the models. We did one other quick story, a lot of work in nuclear power, and it's an Exelon nuclear plant. It's actually in Maryland, and they have two or three reactors, and the reactors are cooled by these giant donuts that run around the bottom of them that are half filled with water. And this cooling water, it has all these big, they call them upcomers, pipes that go from this big ring up to the top of the reactor. And in case of a meltdown of a real problem, the big pumps go on and all that cooling water gets pumped up and just floods out the whole reactor to, cool it down. Anyway, so after 20 years, they have to go into these containment, these donuts, and replace a bunch of filters. So they had us build an exact scale model, and the model was pretty big. It was around 20 feet in diameter, with all the filters, all the pipes, everything else. And they moved it to where they're located in Maryland. And divers, they brought divers up from New Orleans who were trained in this kind of thing. They'd go into the radioactive water and they would actually do the work. And they were on a radio, a lot of radio communication, back to the engineers with the model. And they tell them what the problem was. And the engineers would work out a solution on the model and then radio them back to solution. And they, keep the project going. So they were very interesting applications of models. And a lot of people, you say professional models, I don't know, but they might think of a human being model, not one made of metal and plastic and that sort of thing. Anyway, that was all very interesting work.
So you spent most of your career in these two companies. You say you were 50 54 years of as a professional, and you were in these two companies in marketing and customer service.
Mostly all my work involved sales, marketing, project management, and all of the related customer service.
Well, like I was telling you, when I was seeing some of the responses that you would provide to many of these folks in our Facebook group page, I could just tell there was something special about you, because it was almost like you were sympathetic to, what we were dealing with, because I could tell you had a background in that, in just, writing, keeping your cool, making sure you just get the facts laid out. You could just tell that when you wrote what you wrote, you could tell you had some experience in that, and lowering the temperature, getting the, and just, you always kept your cool. And I thought that was, I admire that, because that's kind of where I was at the time, so you could tell you had all that experience.
Well, I very much admire what you've created there with BridgeCom Systems, and what you've done to further the state of the art of DMR, digital mobile radio. And from all the comments I read and the people I see writing them, I say to myself, boy, I wouldn't want to be in Ron's position for all the tea in China,
Well, having a guy like you in my corner in a way is pretty nice, and it's definitely great to get to meet you even more. What I want to ask more about is as a professional. You're in ham radio. You're doing your career, and it's you're DXing and just doing what you do at that time. The 70s, the 80s. Digital obviously is not even on the radar at this point. For most people, you're just growing in your skill set. And some of the values that you had, that I would like you to share, because you told me about one time, you don't burn a bridge. You had a job that you changed a job, and then went to another job and decided to go back to the other one, and the desk was still waiting on you. It's a fascinating story about how you must have just really impressed some folks.
Yeah, I feel good about that. I've never burned a bridge, and I've always very much valued having a job that was fun. I've known many people that hate waking up in the morning and having to go to work. I was never like that. My wife is not like that. We always chose occupations that we enjoyed doing. Now, granted, we didn't make as much money as some people that did stuff on the high end that they didn't like doing, but we just had a great deal of satisfaction and fun. And, when you can have fun as an adult, it's a really great thing. And, I'm not saying there weren't hard days, and you sure understand customer service, but there's also a lot of satisfaction that comes out from working with people and helping people. That's one of the things I liked about education. You're helping people, and I think helping people, is just a great thing. And I see the reaction of the people on the different Facebook sites when I've answered, and especially all the people that work for you have answered their questions and got them going. It's just a wonderful thing that makes you feel happy about what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, your career is in doing the photography, the marketing, the model building. It's pretty cool. And so you shared with me earlier some photographs. As a photographer, you've had some really nice success with that as well. I believe tell me about some of the success with the photography. You were able to take your work to some pretty impressive magazines at the time.
Well, it was my hobby. It was the hobby stuff. Back in the '80s, late '80s, I guess it was mostly the late '80s. I did a fair number of covers and illustrated articles for an international magazine called Radio Control Model. There's also a magazine which is still in full operation now, Model Aviation. It's operated by the National Aeromodeling Association, the Academy of Model Aeronautics. And I've done work for them, and there were a bunch of other smaller publications I've had stuff, published in. And I've also, over the years, had illustrated articles in the amateur and the ham radio magazines.
Well, how did you get those gigs? I mean, how did you meet those people?
You submit stuff.
Okay.
You submit pictures, you submit ideas, and like I remember with Radio Control Modeler, the guy's name was Dick Kidd, Kidd, and he was in charge of all of the pictures that they published. And I developed a relationship with him, and if I had something, I would send him stuff that I thought he could use. And sure enough, most of the time, he bought them. And I sort of developed a sense of, what people want to see and read about. And I designed, actually, remember the old ICOM 2AT handheld VHF, UHF radios? They weren't dual banders. It was at VHF and UHF. This goes back late 70s, early 80s. It was one of the not fanciest, but one of the best, most popular handheld ICOM 2AT. And I actually designed an auxiliary, what was this now? It had a battery pack on it. But if you use it in your car, it's not going to, if you use it mobile in your vehicle, it's not going to last very long. So I designed it was like 2 by 3 inches by 1 inch thick, a power supply that plugged into a cigarette lighter port and had a wire come out. And I designed how do I describe it? An extension you put on the bottom of their bigger battery pack that allowed you to plug in the DC power and disconnect the battery. So you could run either the battery, or when you're in your car, you plug this into your cigarette lighter and you plug the other end into the radio. It disconnected the battery and ran on the automobile's DC current. And I never sold the idea, but I published it, and a lot of people, I assume, built these things. So stuff like that. I always, did stuff like that for fun, not looking to profit by it.
Well, one of the questions I asked you was, what's your superpower? And you had stated, you'd be a great guy to have on a deserted island. So you just reminded me of that because of your creative, you solved a problem there that you had, and of course put it out there. So how did you get that superpower?
It's just sort of the natural progression of the skills I started working on as a kid. And they just grew and grew. And as I got older, I realized, I get in situations, it could involve an automobile. Many of them involve boats. Some involve model airplanes or stuff around the house. I mean, a multitude of things where something breaks, you don't have the parts, you need to get it operational. And I can somehow, a lot of times, figure out a way of fixing it and getting it up and running with just what I have on hand. And I read these books about people on the desert islands, and I see the movies. And I always, when that question came up, I'm thinking, boy, that's a hard question to answer. What's your superpower? To me, it's the fact that I can solve a problem just from what I have around me. and get something to work, that sort of thing. And it's helped me many, many times. One time down on a Chesapeake, I captained it was a 44-foot sailboat. It was a charter. It was my two kids were on it. It was all friends. I've done a lot of charter boating, but we never took people for money. We always did it just, friends and fellow sailors. And it was a really hot night in August, and the air conditioning conked out. And these boats, when you're back at like we used to go to different places, Annapolis and Baltimore Harbor and St. Michael's, and the places we have the dock space in all had power, and you'd plug the boat into the power and you turn on the air conditioner. Well, the air conditioner conked out. And it turned out it was a poorly installed drain line from the condenser that the way it was configured in the bilge stopped working. And I called the boat rental place, and they didn't have an answer for me. So despite the heat, I was elected. I went down under the floor into the little crawl space bilge, which isn't the most pleasant place in the world. And I see the hose, and I figured out the problem, and I had to relocate it and move it, change its position, basically, after I reconnected it, because it popped off. So some of the crew was drinking beer at the time. And I asked them to pass me down a couple of empty beer bottles. And I used the beer bottles to actually position the hose and got the air conditioning on. That's kind of an example of, the creative problem solving I've done.
You probably like that show MacGyver.
Yeah. And, like I always said, when the boat got back to the rental place, the charter place, and somebody went into the bilge and saw the beer bottles, they're probably scratching their head. Who did that? But it worked. So that's sort of an example of what I'm talking about.
I asked you about a person that you would like to have met or meet, and you'd stated Chuck Yeager. And I thought that was interesting. I know about he's a great American. And so what about Chuck makes you say that? What?
Well, anybody that survived the kind of test flying he did, you have to figure, what should I say, has the right stuff. So I read his book and did some other research on him. And he was an aerospace engineer.
Yep.
And he got into some unbelievably horrific, dangerous situations, being dropped out of the big bomber in one of those little X-1 rocket planes, I mean, that stuff was very experimental, flew, faster than the speed of sound, and highly dangerous. And the way he described his method of saving his own life and getting out of these situations was, first of all, he never gave up. And that's the thing I found this with model airplane flying. A certain amount of people, as soon as they get into trouble, they shut their brain shuts off and they instantly crash and burn. Well, you can't do that. You got to persevere and figure out what your problem is and deal with it till you solve it. And hopefully that'll come before you hit the ground, And that's what Yeager did. And countless documented experiences where he did these amazing saves by reaching around, taking a plier, fixing something, and saving his life and saving the plane. And I'm saying to myself, he'd be a good guy to be on a desert island with. Again, very creative problem solving. And that always intrigued me with him because, as I said, anybody that could live through a career like him, beyond amazing. It's not amazing. It's just dedication and skill and perseverance.
Indeed, yeah. He's an amazing individual, and I agree with you. I mean, you mentioned perseverance and grit, if you will. He had the right stuff. Yeah. And, looking back at your story and listening to what you're saying, I mean, you've got some of that as well. And, Chuck Yeager, I know you're not an aerospace engineer or pilot right now, but I mean, these traits are, they're special, and
yeah, I don't know what causes people to have these traits. And like, I think some of it goes actually back to my upbringing. Uh, my parents were very patient people. And you have to learn patience. You have to learn how to stay on task and not give up and just keep pushing forward. And again, I just know and see too many people. I hate to say it, I've seen it with the DMR radios. These people buy the radio and fool around with it for a few days, can't deal with it, and then they put on Facebook, the radio's no good, the company's no good. I'm just going to use it as a brick paperweight. They don't give it a chance. No perseverance, no personal effort, no anything. And I don't understand those kind of people.
I want to ask you, can you tell us, if you had to just kind of wrap it up, and you might have touched on this just now, but what has really made you successful in life? I mean, you've had an awesome career. You're into ham radio, which is why you're here. I mean, it just seems like it all goes hand in hand. So, if there was one thing that you could cite, that you would a skill that you have that's just made you successful, or the way you are, what would it be?
First of all, I think you have to define success.
Okay.
To me and to my wife, being rich, making a lot of money was not our definition of success. As I said earlier, one of our main things is to be able to enjoy what we're doing. And we both have had very enjoyable, fun careers. We've raised two great kids, and we enjoy ourselves. And, we consider ourselves very successful, but not by the dollar sign measuring stick. And I think something my father used to say, it's not important. Like my father used to say to me, I don't care if you want to be a trash collector, but you got to be the best trash collector there ever was. So it's the idea, not so important what you do, but what's important is how well you do it. And if you do it well, you're going to achieve success. I don't know how else to put it.
No, I think that's a great way of putting it. Your dad was 100% on, I think. I think this has been a great interview. Unless, do you have anything else you want to say, Gil, or add? I mean, I think I can wrap it up here. I've got something I'd like to say. I'm going to basically speak to the audience here for a moment and just, I want to encourage them to interact with you on the boards, if that's okay with you, because you're active and you're out there and, you're helping people.
That's okay with me. All I ask is that you have to be willing to work yourself too, to help solve your problem. I mean, I'll say it, my other pet peeve with some of the newer hams today is that they don't understand that amateur radio was founded on experimentation, on learning, on building equipment and solving problems. And, it's not like you buy a cell phone, it doesn't work. So you take it back to the place you bought it, or you call their customer service person and somebody will, fix it. With amateur radio, you can get all the information that's available, like on the internet, on the different websites, from your great videos and all the other information you guys put out on it, in public. But then you have to take personal responsibility to, solve the problem yourself. And I'm not saying there's not a time where you might have a defective piece of equipment and you have to send it back and get it fixed or replaced. That does happen. But the first line of defense is that you have to be your own MIS person, your own, repair guy, and try to persevere and figure out a solution to the problem. So that would be my biggest piece of advice. So I guess I've talked myself out here.
No, actually, that's very good. I mean, that's some really good advice to give to new hams entering into the landscape, as well as just guys that are just getting back into it. Because like you told me, you've been in and out of ham radio like many of us, over the years. You've gone, in waves of interest. And with the new DMR stuff, it's really challenging to a lot of people who've had previous experience with other types of technology, and now they're being exposed to commercial equipment, and it's rattling their brains, and
one other comment you just brought into my mind. From what I read, too many of these new people, they buy a DMR radio and look at the specifications and all of the things it can do, and they immediately start pushing buttons, flipping switches, keying up, and trying to get it to do all these different things, and they are dismal failures, and they say the radio is no good. My advice is you take it one step at a time. I started out, with your plug and play package. My initial issue took me a couple hours was getting on my own Wi-Fi. I could connect with an Ethernet cable, but I couldn't do it through Wi-Fi, and I really didn't want the cable. So I persevered and got it on Wi-Fi. Then once I did that, I was making contacts within, a half hour or so and enjoying it. And once I got past that, I knew I had to download updated firmware. I knew I had to learn how to manipulate code plugs. So with the help of your videos, I learned how to do all that stuff. But again, I took it one step at a time, and I didn't, jump from point A to point M back to Z and to L and get myself all confused on all these different things. I learned one thing at a time and then moved on. And I think the newer people have to use that approach, and they'll be a lot more successful and have a lot more fun.
I agree. That's some great advice, and it certainly has proven to be a recipe for success for you and me as well, and hopefully others. Well, with that, folks, I wanted to just thank Gil for being on the show today. I've learned a lot about him. I know what makes him tick. He's a great guy, and this is why he's on this show. He's a success. He's a ham radio heavyweight. So thank you, Gil, for being on here today. 7-3, my friend.
You're very welcome. My pleasure on 7-3s to you. This is K3GIL, QRT.